By morning, the most feared man in the city would realize the only thing he couldn't control was the life growing inside the woman he left behind. He didn't know that yet. When he entered the building, everything was routine. Marble floors, soft lighting, men who moved before he spoke, silence that bent around him out of habit. This was his world, predictable in its obedience. He walked without looking at faces because faces always lowered themselves first. The elevator doors hadn't even closed behind him when something disrupted the rhythm. Sound. Metal wheels catching on tile. Pause that lasted half a second too long. He turned, not out of curiosity but irritation. Welcome to Dark Crown Romance Channel. Please like, share and subscribe. A cleaner struggled with an overfilled cart near the service corridor. One hand braced against her lower back, breath shallow, shoulders tight with restraint. Pregnancy showed itself before her face did. 7 months, maybe more. The uniform couldn't hide it. She adjusted her grip, tried to move past him without lifting her eyes, and that was when the world stalled. She looked up. The recognition wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It moved across her face like a reflex she failed to stop. Shock sharpened into control so quickly it almost fooled him. Almost. His body reacted before thought could catch up. His steps slowed. His chest tightened once, sharply like a warning. This was the moment his world stopped obeying him. He hadn't expected to see her again. Not here. Not like this. Not carrying weight that had nothing to do with the cart. Her name surfaced uninvited, dragging memory with it. The apartment she'd left. The silence she'd chosen. The papers he'd signed because pride had told him it was cleaner to let her go than admit he was wrong. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Around them, the building held its breath. Guards noticed his stillness and froze where they stood. No one moved unless he did. She lowered her gaze first, not in submission but survival. He recognized the difference. It unsettled him more than defiance ever had. She pushed the cart forward as if he were just another obstacle, murmured an apology so quiet it was meant to disappear, and tried to pass. The smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with something softer, familiar. He saw her hands tremble. Not fear of him. Something deeper. Exhaustion. Hunger. The kind of restraint learned, not chosen. When she passed, his eyes followed the curve of her stomach without permission. The life inside her shifted, or maybe he imagined it. His jaw tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. Nothing this precise ever was. He turned slightly, enough for his guards to read the signal. Do not intervene yet. She reached the end of the corridor and paused, fingers gripping the cart handle as if waiting for something. Voice. Command. She didn't look back. That restraint cost her. He could see it in the way her shoulders held tension like a held breath. He realized then she hadn't expected to see him either. That changed things. The past wasn't buried anymore. It was standing between them in a borrowed uniform, breathing too fast, pretending the ground wasn't tilting. He spoke her name quietly, not loud enough for anyone else. Landed anyway. She flinched. Just once. Enough. The building exhaled with it. She turned slowly, eyes steady now, walls up. You're mistaken, she said, voice calm, practiced wrong. He almost admired the attempt. Almost. He took one step closer. Not threatening. Not kind. Just inevitable. The guards shifted again, sealing exits without drawing attention. This wasn't protocol. This was instinct. Hers too, apparently, because her hand slid unconsciously over her stomach, protective, claiming space he suddenly realized he had no right to claim. He hadn't asked about the child. He hadn't needed to. The timing punched the answer into him anyway. 7 months. The math closed like a trap. Anger didn't come. Fear didn't either. What came was something colder. Control reasserting itself around a problem that should not exist. Who put you here? He asked, not accusing, not loud. She hesitated. That hesitation was everything. She looked past him, then back, measuring consequences with frightening accuracy. "I clean," she said. "That's all." It was a lie that wanted to be believed. He nodded once, slow. He'd learned long ago that lies like this weren't meant for him. They were meant for whoever was listening. That meant someone was. Someone had forced her into his sightline. Someone wanted him to see her like this. Vulnerable. Public. Carrying something that tied her to him in a way blood contracts never could. He stepped back, giving her space she didn't trust. "Finish your floor," he said. "Not permission. Test." She pushed the cart forward, heart pounding loud enough he could almost hear it. As she moved away, the question settled in his mind, heavy and sharp. Why was she here? And who had decided this was the way he should find out? Silence was her only shield. She moved the cart in slow, measured lines, wiping surfaces that were already clean, keeping her eyes down, keeping her breathing steady. She didn't rush. Rushing would look like fear. She didn't slow either. Slowing would invite attention. When she spoke to anyone, her voice stayed professional, distant, trained to disappear. When she reached the end of the corridor again, she didn't glance back. She didn't need to. She could feel him there. His presence pressed against her back like weight. He watched without moving, and that was worse than if he'd spoken. She addressed a passing employee softly, asked for a fresh cloth, called him sir without lifting her head. The word landed wrong. Too small. Too deliberate. It was a boundary she set with one syllable. He noticed. Of course he did. The men around him noticed too. They waited for his reaction the way animals wait for weather. He gave none. Instead he observed. The way she favored her right side. The way she paused before bending. The way her hand kept finding her stomach as if counting time. She was pretending not to know him, and the effort it took was visible in every controlled movement. He felt something shift, subtle but dangerous. Not anger. Not regret. Ownership was the closest word, and he rejected it immediately. He had signed away the right to feel that. He had let her go. That was the story he'd told himself. But stories didn't survive evidence. She finished the corridor and turned toward the open lobby, where sunlight filtered through glass and people moved freely. Safety, if it existed, was out there. He didn't let her reach it. He lifted a hand, palm down. The smallest gesture. Everything changed. Guards stepped forward at once, voices low, movements practiced. "Maintenance," someone announced calmly. "Please clear the floor." No alarms. No raised voices. Just doors closing, elevators halted. Foot traffic redirected as if this were routine. Within seconds the space emptied. The sound changed. The building grew quiet in a way that pressed on the ears. This was the moment safety disappeared. She felt it before she understood it. Her shoulders tensed. She stopped pushing the cart. For the first time she turned fully toward him. Her face was composed, but her eyes sharpened. "Sir," she said again more firmly. "I need to finish my shift." He studied her like a problem he couldn't solve by force. She wasn't begging. She wasn't pleading. She was drawing lines. That interested him more than obedience ever had. "You will," he replied. "Just not here." Her breath caught just once. Enough to tell him she understood the implication. Private spaces had rules she couldn't control. Public spaces had witnesses. She glanced toward the exits, now guarded, then back to him. "I don't know you," she said quietly. It wasn't a denial. It was a request. "Let me keep pretending." He stepped closer, stopping a careful distance away. Close enough that she could see the scar near his temple. Close enough that he could smell the faint soap on her skin, layered over exhaustion. "That," he said, voice even, "is your choice." He turned slightly, signaling the guards again. They moved to take the cart. She tightened her grip. "Please," she said, and the word tasted like a compromise she hated. He paused. The pause stretched. He looked at her stomach again, then back to her face. Something in his expression shifted. Too fast to name. "Leave it," he told the guards. Another rule changed. She exhaled, slow and careful. He gestured toward a side corridor. Not a command. An expectation. She hesitated. This was the moment. She could refuse. She could force a scene. She could remind him they were not who they used to be. The life inside her shifted again, stronger this time, and the decision narrowed. She pushed the cart where he indicated, step steady, head high. She passed him without looking at his face, without acknowledging the history standing inches away. He followed at a measured pace. When they reached the corridor, he stopped her with a word. Name. Controlled. Cut through the quiet like a blade. She didn't turn. Don't, she said. Not angry. Not afraid. Just final. He held the silence for a moment longer, then let it go. Why won't you acknowledge me? He asked, and this time the question carried weight. She swallowed, fingers tightening on the handle. Because acknowledging you gives you power. Because pretending you're a stranger is the only thing keeping me standing. She didn't say any of that. She chose the safest truth. Because if I do, she said quietly, everything changes. He watched her closely. That answer confirmed what he'd already begun to suspect. She wasn't hiding from him. She was protecting something. And whatever it was, it mattered more to her than he ever had. This child was never part of his plan. She knew that before she knew the shape of the fear that now lived under her ribs. From the moment the sickness started, from the moment the doctor avoided her eyes and spoke too gently, she understood that whatever future she had imagined no longer belonged to her alone. She remembered the night she told him. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a quiet sentence delivered across a table between two people who had already begun to drift apart. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't denied it. He had gone still, the same stillness she saw now, and said nothing for a long time. Silence had been his answer then too. She left before dawn. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself he would come looking. He never did. Months passed measured in ultrasounds and borrowed apartments and jobs that didn't ask questions. She learned how to disappear the way some people learn languages. Carefully, with purpose. Cleaning work was perfect. Invisible. Expected. No one memorized the face of a woman who wiped floors. No one asked about the ring she no longer wore. The fear of being found became routine, like brushing teeth or counting money. She learned which streets to avoid, which names to never say aloud. She learned how to keep her head down even when the weight of the pregnancy made every movement slower, heavier. When she took the job in the luxury building, she told herself it was temporary. She didn't know he owned half the floors. She didn't know fate could be that cruel. When she felt him behind her earlier, it was like the past had reached forward and grabbed her by the throat. Now, walking down the sealed corridor, she focused on her breathing. Protect the child. Everything else was secondary. He walked a few steps behind, not crowding her, not touching her. That restraint unsettled her more than force ever could. She remembered how deliberate he was with space. How he never rushed decisions. How he waited until people convinced themselves there was no danger before acting. She stopped when he told her to stop. The room they entered wasn't threatening. Soft light. Airs. Water already poured. He had planned this. Of course he had. Sit, he said. Not a command. An assumption. She did. Sitting eased the pressure in her back, but it also made her feel smaller. Vulnerable. She rested a hand on her stomach without thinking. He noticed. His gaze flickered just briefly. You shouldn't be here, he said. She almost laughed. Instead she answered honestly. I could say the same. He didn't react. He studied her face, the changes time had written there. She wondered what he saw. Someone weaker. Someone marked. Or someone who had survived without him. Why didn't you tell me where you were? He asked. The question sounded simple. It wasn't. I did, she replied. You just didn't come. The silence that followed was heavy, old, familiar. She looked away first. That was her mistake. The door opened slightly. A guard leaned in, eyes flicking from her face to the file in his hand. He hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. He looked again more closely. Her last name surfaced on his tongue before he could stop it. Questioning. Recognition. Her heart dropped. She stood too quickly, one hand bracing the table. "No," she said, to no one in particular. The guard's posture stiffened. He understood what recognition meant in this world. Information spread faster than orders. The boss's expression hardened, not toward her but toward the guard. "Leave," he said. The man obeyed instantly, but the damage was done. Someone else knew. The safety she had built with silence cracked. She felt it like cold air on skin. "Who else?" she asked quietly, fear breaking through her control for the first time. He didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. She realized then that hiding had an expiration date, and it had just run out. When he stopped asking, people started disappearing. He sat back in the chair as if nothing in the room required urgency. That calm was the warning. She had seen it once before years ago, when a business partner laughed too loudly at dinner and vanished before dessert. Back then, she hadn't understood the pattern. Now she did. He didn't ask her to explain the pregnancy again. He didn't ask why she had taken this job, or how long she had been cleaning these floors, or how close she'd come to him without being seen. Questions were for uncertainty. He had moved past that. His eyes tracked details instead. The way her shoes were worn unevenly, suggesting long hours standing. The way her badge had been reissued recently. The way the guard had known her last name without being told. He lifted a finger once. Silent signal. Somewhere beyond the walls, the building shifted. Elevators paused. Cameras rerouted. The world narrowed to controlled corridors. She felt it without seeing it, the way prey senses a net tightening. "You were hired 3 weeks ago," he said, not looking at her. "Transferred from a subcontractor that doesn't usually service my properties." She swallowed. He continued. "Your background check was clean. Too clean. That was the problem." She had worked hard to erase herself, but erasure left smooth edges. Real lives were messy. He finally met her eyes. There was no anger there, only focus. "You didn't choose this building," he said. "Someone chose it for you." Her hand tightened over her stomach. "I didn't know it was yours," she said. He nodded once, acknowledging the truth of that. "That doesn't change why you're here." He stood. The room seemed to recalibrate around him. Power didn't need volume. Needed gravity. He walked to the window, watching the city below like a board already in play. "People don't place a pregnant woman in my line of sight by accident," he said. That sentence landed harder than any accusation. She felt the weight of it press into her chest. "I've been hiding," she whispered. "I don't have enemies." He turned slightly. "You do now." Another signal. This one sharper. The door opened again. Different men this time. Quieter. They didn't look at her. They didn't need to. They were already moving pieces elsewhere. She imagined phone calls ending abruptly. Offices going dark. Names being removed from lists. Fear crawled up her spine, not for herself, but for what this meant. If she had been used as leverage, the scale of the game was larger than her survival. "Who?" she asked. Came out smaller than she intended. He considered her for a moment, then answered honestly. "Someone who knew I would stop for you." That was the betrayal. Not just that someone had placed her here, but that they understood him well enough to predict the pause. The weakness. He returned to the table, leaning his hands against it, close enough now that she could feel the warmth of him. "They wanted proof," he said. "Proof that you still mattered." Her chest tightened. "To you." He shook his head slowly. "To them." Silence stretched. Somewhere in the building, a door closed with finality. She realized that people were already paying for this, and she didn't know if that made her safer or more exposed. "If you send me away," she said carefully, They won't stop. He studied her face, the fear she was no longer hiding, the resolve beneath it. No, he agreed. They won't. That was the second confirmation. The first was that she'd been placed here deliberately. The second was that her existence was now a message. He straightened. Decision made. You're not leaving this building today, he said. Not a threat. Fact. Her breath caught. I don't want your protection, she said. You already have it, he replied. The words settled like a closing door. She understood then that restraint was the most frightening form of control. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't touched her. And yet everything had changed. Somewhere, someone had wanted him to see her like this. Vulnerable. Visible. Carrying proof he couldn't ignore. And whoever that was had just declared war without firing a single shot. Safety arrived without permission. They didn't say the word escort, but that was what it was. Two men appeared beside her cleaning cart, voices calm, hands open, already guiding her away from the corridor. The medical excuse moved ahead of her like a shield. Anyone watching would see concern, not control. He didn't touch her. He didn't look back. That was worse. Decisions had already been made. The elevator doors closed on the floor she had memorized, the stains she scrubbed every morning, the quiet corner where she rested when the weight became too much. The descent felt longer than physics allowed. She focused on breathing, one hand steadying her belly, the other clutching the strap of her bag as if it still belonged to her life. The parking level was cold. Cars waited with engines running, black glass swallowing light. The door opened before she reached for it. Inside, leather and silence. She tried the handle. Not aggressively. Efficiently. Car moved. The city blurred past tinted glass. Landmarks reduced to shapes. She counted turns by instinct and failed. I'm fine, she said, then hated how small it sounded. One of the men met her eyes in the mirror. Respectful, unmoved. We're taking you to be checked, he said. Protocol. Listener orientation cut through her panic. This was no longer about her health. This was about containment. Her phone vibrated once. No signal. She looked up sharply. The mirror showed a small shake of the head. She swallowed words she knew wouldn't land. He was in the other car. She could feel him without seeing him. A gravity pulling everything into alignment. The gate opened without stopping. The building beyond was quiet, private, too clean to be temporary. Doors opened. A woman in scrubs appeared as if summoned by the thought of her. The check was real. That was the cruelty. Blood pressure. Questions. A blanket that smelled like bleach. Concern delivered with practiced neutrality. She answered because refusing would be a scene. Scenes were leverage. When they were done, she expected a release, a return, something that resembled choice. Instead, another door. Another corridor. The room she was placed in had windows that didn't open and a couch positioned for observation. Water arrived. Food followed. No one asked if she wanted either. Safety arrived without permission and settled in. Time thickened. She paced until her ankles ached. She pressed her forehead to the glass and tried to find the street. He entered without announcement. Same calm. Same restraint. He stopped a respectful distance away, as if proximity were a concession he wouldn't grant himself. You're staying, he said, until I understand the scope. I didn't agree to this, she said. He nodded. I know. That acknowledgement landed heavier than defiance would have. You can't keep me, she tried. I can, he replied, and then softer. I am. He gestured to a tablet on the table. Your employment file. She looked. Her breath hitched. The logo at the top wasn't the subcontractor she'd applied through. It was a shell. The timestamps were wrong. The references were immaculate. Too immaculate. This isn't mine, she said. He watched her read the lines she hadn't written. It is now, he said. Someone used my network to build it. That was the irreversible change. Her life had been rewritten with his tools. Protection and erasure braided together. Why? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. He never did when the answer carried weight. If they could alter your records with my access, he said. They wanted me implicated from the start. The room seemed smaller. Her chest tightened. So this was a trap, she whispered. For me. He held her gaze. Or for me. Question hung there sharp. If the trap was for her, she was bait. If it was for him, she was proof. Either way, the cost was hers. I won't disappear, she said. He didn't argue. You already did, he said, and tapped the tablet once. The screen showed a new status. Leave. Medical. Indefinite. She closed her eyes. The baby shifted, a reminder that something inside her was not a piece on anyone's board. He noticed the movement and looked away first. That too was restraint. You'll be safe here, he said. Until I decide the next move. And after? She asked. He didn't lie. After depends on who wanted you seen. The silence returned, heavier than before. She understood then that safety was not a destination. It was a holding pattern while wars were decided elsewhere. And somewhere beyond the glass, someone had spent his money, used his name, and placed her exactly where his control would be tested. Some divorces are just postponed wars. He didn't sit when she finally spoke. He stood near the window, back half turned, as if facing her directly would make this an interrogation instead of a reckoning. She stayed on the couch, one hand resting on her stomach, the other folded tightly into the fabric of the blanket they'd given her. The silence stretched, not awkward, just heavy with the things neither of them had ever said out loud. You didn't look for me, she said finally, voice steady in a way that surprised even her. It wasn't accusation. It was a fact. He nodded once. You vanished. I was pushed, she replied. That made him turn. Not sharply. Carefully. Listener orientation settled between them. This wasn't a reunion, it was a post-mortem. She told him why she left without dressing it up. How the house stopped being hers long before the papers were signed. How every room had eyes, every conversation a witness. How love became liability in a world that only respected leverage. I thought if I stayed, she said, they'd use me to reach you. He didn't deny it. That was the first collision. He told her why he let her go without a fight. How a divorce, public and clean, created distance his enemies would respect. How he believed separation was a shield. I thought I was choosing the lesser war, he said. She laughed once, quietly. You chose the war that didn't bleed where you could see it. The lie they both believed sat there in the open. That distance equals safety. She told him about the pregnancy complications then, not dramatically, just as a timeline. The fainting spells she ignored. The nights she couldn't breathe. The doctor she stopped seeing because the bills started asking questions. He stiffened at that. Why didn't anyone tell me? He asked, and for the first time there was something raw in his voice. She shook her head. They knew better. That was the irreversible change. He realized the information had been filtered long before it reached him. Who? He asked, and this time it wasn't a question meant for her. She named no one. She didn't have to. He recognized the pattern now. Medical records delayed. Insurance rerouted. Employment files rewritten. All quiet. All polite. The kind of cruelty that doesn't leave marks you can point to. They decided you were safer unprotected, he said slowly. She met his eyes. They decided I wasn't yours anymore. The power cost landed there. Protection in his world wasn't affection. It was territory. Removing it was a sentence. He paced once, stopped, paced again, then stilled. Control fractured not in rage but in recalibration. I would have taken the risk, he said. I know, she replied, and that was worse. Because it meant the decision had been made for him. He asked about the day she signed the papers. She told him about the call that came an hour before. The one that said the settlement would stand only if she didn't contest custody she didn't even know she was carrying yet. She told him about the lawyer who wouldn't meet her eyes. He closed them at that. They moved without my authorization, he said. They moved because they believed you'd accept it, she answered. Another truth neither could escape. He had built a system so efficient it could decide against him. The baby kicked again, sharper this time. He flinched, then caught himself. Is he okay? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. For now. The pause mattered. He caught it. And before, he said. She exhaled. Before was touch and go. That knowledge settled like a weight he couldn't set down. A future nearly erased by paperwork and silence. He understood now that the marriage hadn't ended. It had been paused by people who assumed postponement was the same as consent. Who decided she didn't deserve my protection? He asked again, quieter, more dangerous. She looked past him to the glass, to the city that had swallowed her for months. Someone who thought love was your weakness, she said. He absorbed that without protest. Outside, the city kept breathing. Inside, a war resumed where it had been interrupted, not with lawyers or signatures, but with a truth neither of them could unlearn. In this city, pregnancy is leverage. The first rumor didn't sound like a rumor at all. It sounded like concern disguised as courtesy. Phone call asking after his health. A message congratulating him on new responsibilities. By the time the third inquiry arrived, phrased as a joke, he knew the information had already crossed the river. A pregnant woman under his roof was no longer private. It was a signal. The building adjusted around that truth before he spoke a word. Elevators changed routes. Security doubled without orders. Staff who didn't need to know were rotated out. Those who stayed stopped making eye contact with her belly, which somehow felt worse than staring. She felt the shift before she understood it. When she walked the corridor, conversations ended too quickly. When she sat, chairs were placed a fraction closer than comfort allowed. Attention followed her like a shadow that knew her name. She asked him once, quietly, if this was normal. He answered honestly. Nothing is normal once it's noticed. The city noticed through its usual channels. Discreet dinners where forks paused midair. Texts sent and unsent. A rumor passed in the language of favors owed and debts remembered. Not about him. About the child. That was the pivot. Listener orientation tightened. This was no longer about reconciliation or protection. It was about ownership of the future. He learned about the conversation that mattered not from his inner circle, but from a man who had nothing to gain by lying. The man didn't name it a bounty. He called it interest. He said there were people asking whether the child would be acknowledged publicly or remain a vulnerability. He said the question came with numbers attached. Small ones at first. Probing ones. He ended the call with a sentence that carried the weight. They're discussing options before the mother is ready to give birth. She was sitting across from him when he received the message, folding a blanket she hadn't unfolded yet. He didn't hide his reaction. He didn't soften it. Control demanded clarity now. They're talking about the baby, he said. The word landed between them like glass. Her hand went to her stomach, not protectively, but reflexively, as if the body understood before the mind. Talking how? She asked. He chose precision. As leverage. Silence followed, the kind that rearranges priorities. She stood slowly, testing her balance. So this is the part where I leave, she said, not as a threat, but as a plan forming. He blocked the doorway without touching her. No, he replied. Control shifted into vulnerability. Leaving makes it visible, she countered. Staying makes it valuable. He didn't argue the logic. He reframed the risk. Outside it's uncontained, he said. Inside it's defended. She searched his face for reassurance and found calculation instead. That frightened her more than anger would have. The city escalated without announcement. A doctor cancelled an appointment she hadn't scheduled. A charity gala quietly changed venues when his name appeared on the guest list. A woman she'd never met sent a gift basket with a note congratulating her on continuing the line. The note didn't include a name. It didn't need one. That night, a discussion took place 2 blocks away. behind frosted glass and expensive smiles. No decisions were written down. They didn't need to be. The idea circulated. A child born into power reshapes succession. A child removed reshapes obedience. Someone asked whether the mother could be persuaded to disappear again. Someone else replied that disappearance invites attention. Then the unspoken option was placed on the table, not as a suggestion, but as a contingency. He heard about it before dawn. The report was short, clean, terrifying. "They're not planning to touch you," his lieutenant said. "They're discussing timing." She overheard the word timing and knew it wasn't about schedules. "They won't wait," she said. "They never do." He turned the city inward, pulling favors tight, calling in markers that would burn bridges later. Every move bought time at a cost he accepted without hesitation. But time sharpened the question neither of them could avoid. Was the child safer inside his world, wrapped in rules and guns and eyes that never slept? Or outside it, unnamed, unclaimed, invisible until it wasn't? She voiced the thought he hadn't yet allowed himself. "Your protection makes enemies," she said. "My absence makes opportunity." He didn't deny either. He only answered with the truth he'd been circling. "My world creates threats," he said. "But it also ends them." The city held its breath, waiting to see which truth would prevail. Running would have been easier. He said it like a fact, not an invitation, sliding a folder across the table without ceremony. Inside was a life already built. A different country. Different name. Medical care arranged months in advance. Accounts seeded quietly so no trail would point back. The kind of disappearance only men like him could offer. Clean enough to pass for fate. "You would never be found," he said. "Not by them. Not by me." The sentence was designed to sound merciful, but she heard the cost hiding inside it. Erasure. Silence. Safety bought with absence. She didn't touch the folder. Instead she looked at the window, at the city laid out like a map of consequences. Listener orientation sharpened. This was the moment everything could simplify. She imagined a street where no one knew her face. A clinic where her name wasn't weighed. A future where the child arrived without history. The temptation was real, and that frightened her more than refusal. "What happens to the truth?" she asked. "If I take this?" He answered without hesitation. "It stays buried." Control hovered between them, waiting to see who would claim it. She turned back to him. "Then I won't run." The refusal landed softly but changed the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. His expression shifted in a way she recognized now, the way things did right before rule changed. "You don't understand what you're choosing," he said. She met his gaze, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I do," she replied. "I'm choosing to know." Silence followed, thick with recalculation. She pushed the folder back toward him, not angrily, just decisively. "No more protection without answers," she said. "No more decisions made around me." Vulnerability cracked through control. "Truth doesn't make you safer," he warned. "It makes you visible." "I'm already visible," she said. "What you're offering is a lie that feels like mercy." That was the rule she broke. In his world, safety was transactional. Protection was offered in exchange for obedience. She refused the exchange and demanded parity instead. He studied her like a variable that refused to settle. "You stay," he said finally, not as permission but as acknowledgement. "Then you stay with knowledge." The words felt like a door opening into a darker room. He told her about the night her placement was arranged. About the man who suggested it as leverage, and the woman who approved it as inevitability. He named names he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Each one stripped away another layer of illusion. Her breath shortened as the picture sharpened. "So I was bait," she said. He didn't deny it. "And now," she continued, "the baby is currency. Only if we let it be," he replied. The sentence sounded strong, but she heard the uncertainty underneath. False safety crept in, seductive and dangerous. Knowledge felt like armor, but it weighed heavy. She asked the question that cut through everything. "If I stay," she said, "what do I become?" He answered honestly, "A line they won't cross without consequence." She absorbed that. Being a line meant being drawn. It meant being defended but also being tested. "And if I leave," she pressed. "You become a problem that solves itself," he said. The truth stung more than comfort would have. She stood, one hand braced on the table. "Then I stay," she said again, this time not as refusal but as claim. The city outside continued its quiet surveillance, unaware that a rule had already been rewritten. By staying, she rejected disappearance, rejected silence, rejected the false safety of being forgotten. She chose visibility beside a man whose world consumed what it noticed. The dark romance ignition wasn't in his touch or his promise. It was in the alignment of risk. He closed the folder she hadn't opened and set it aside. "Then understand this," he said. "Staying makes you untouchable to some and irresistible to others." She nodded. "I'm already pregnant," she replied. "I crossed untouchable months ago." The false safety lingered, whispering that truth equaled control, that honesty would protect her. It wouldn't. It would expose her to a different kind of danger, one that smiled and waited. As she turned toward the window again, the city reflected back at her, vast and patient. Somewhere within it, new calculations were already forming, adjusting to the rule she had broken by staying. Retaliation began before dawn and finished before the city noticed it had started. It moved through back channels and quiet hallways, through favors called in and debts collected, through doors that opened once and never again. Listener orientation settled hard. Protection always leaves bodies behind. She didn't see the first consequence, but she felt it in the sudden stillness of the compound, the way guards stopped checking their phones, the way names vanished from the morning brief. He didn't announce anything. He didn't explain. He simply adjusted the perimeter and let the machine do what it was built to do. When she asked what had happened, he answered with a single sentence that carried more weight than comfort ever could. "The question won't be asked again." That was when she understood the cost wasn't theoretical. It had a shape. It had names she would never hear. The anchor moment arrived quietly when she saw the ledger on his desk. Not open, not hidden, just present, and realized the city was being rewritten around her absence from danger. She tried to tell herself it wasn't about her. It never was, he would have said. It was about signals. Consequences followed intent, not emotion. And yet, when she placed her hand over her stomach and felt the small, insistent movement inside, the truth cut deeper. Someone had died so this life could continue without interruption. He noticed her reaction and didn't stop it. Control slipped into vulnerability, then hardened again. "If you stay," he had said, "this is what staying looks like." External consequence pressed in immediately. A meeting was called that had no agenda and no minutes. Men who hadn't sat at the same table in years arrived without argument. She stood at the edge of the room, not invited, not dismissed. He didn't ask her to leave. He didn't shield her from the sight of it. Silence fell as he entered, and then he did the thing that locked the power in place. He acknowledged her. Not by name, not with affection, but with lineage. "She is family," he said, voice level, eyes steady. The sentence didn't ask for approval. It imposed reality. Irreversible change snapped into place. Family meant protection that could not be negotiated around. It also meant liability that could not be ignored. The room reacted the way rooms like this always did. Not with shock but with recalculation. She felt it like pressure on the chest. Power lock engaged. From that moment she was no longer a variable. She was a constant. Listener orientation sharpened again. Once the world marks you, it never forgets. The moral collapse came not from the violence she hadn't witnessed, but from the relief that followed it. She hated herself for exhaling. For being grateful that the threat had ended quickly. For accepting the safety bought with blood she didn't have to wash from her hands. He saw it in her face and didn't pretend otherwise. "You didn't choose how," he said. "You chose that." The difference mattered to him. It didn't matter enough to her. Consequences continued to ripple outward. Invitations rescinded. Contracts dissolved. A familiar name crossed out in red ink and never written again. She asked who it was. He said nothing. That silence was heavier than confession. Later, alone, she confronted him with a question that had been circling since the first body fell somewhere she would never see. "Do you love me?" she asked, not softly, not accusingly, just needing to know if the word still functioned in a world like this. He didn't answer immediately. That hesitation was the most honest thing he'd given her. "Love," he said finally, "is what remains after the city decides what you are worth." She understood then that being claimed didn't elevate her above the violence. It aligned her with it. The baby kicked, sharp and sudden, and she flinched. He moved instinctively, a hand hovering, not touching, respecting the line she had drawn earlier. Control met restraint. "The world will mock you now," he said. "It already has." The cliffhanger tightened without spectacle. If love existed here, it would exist inside consequence, not outside it. She looked at the window again, at the city that now knew her silhouette even if it didn't know her name, and wondered whether anything could survive being claimed so completely. Morning arrived without ceremony. The city didn't wake so much as settle, like dust after demolition, and the anchor moment came not with sirens or headlines but with the absence of them. Threats were gone. Names erased. Trails burned until even memory struggled to follow. Listener orientation pressed in. Silence returned, heavier than before. She felt it as she stood by the window, watching traffic resume its ordinary choreography, people moving as if nothing had been rearranged in the dark. He stood behind her, not close enough to touch, close enough to be unavoidable. The machine had finished its work. Meetings cancelled themselves. Documents vanished from servers that no longer existed. Men who might have spoken found better reasons not to. She asked how complete it was, and he answered by placing a thin folder on the table, untouched by coffee rings or fingerprints, the last remaining legal path she hadn't known existed. It was clean. It was lawful. It was a door. And then he burned it. Not theatrically. Not angrily. Paper met flame in a metal tray. Curled, blackened, disappeared. Final irreversible act completed. Control shifted into consequence. She didn't stop him. She watched the fire consume the option that could have made distance possible, and in that watching she understood the shape of what he had done. Not to punish her. To bind the future. The city reset under fear that pretended to be order. Guards relaxed without relaxing. The compound exhaled without ever feeling safe. He spoke again only after the ashes cooled. "No one can move you now," he said, and she heard what he didn't say, "including you." She turned to face him, 7 months heavy with a life that refused to be theoretical, and asked the question she'd been circling since the moment he froze in the lobby. "If I had kept walking," she said, "would any of this exist?" He didn't lie. "Something would," he said. "It would have been worse." Calm folded into shock not through volume but through realization. The cost had been paid either way. She had simply chosen when to look at it. Outside, the city's screens refreshed with nothing remarkable. No scandal. No obituary worth reading. The quiet devastation lived between headlines, in the rooms that stayed dark, in the calls that went unanswered. She sat at the table and felt the baby turn, slow and deliberate, as if responding to the stillness. Control slipped into vulnerability. She asked if there would ever be a day when the child could be ordinary. He didn't answer immediately. Silence stretched until it became consequence. "Ordinary," he said at last, "is a privilege the city doesn't grant us." She stood, the movement careful, and crossed the room to him. Not to plead. To mark the moment. "You found me cleaning floors," she said, not accusing, not soft. "You saw me trying not to be seen." He nodded. He remembered. He always remembered the first alignment of variables. "You could have let me go," she said. You could have chosen legacy over me. He looked away then, just briefly, a fracture she would not forget. I chose legacy, he said. I redefined it. The sentence didn't comfort. Clarified. She understood that love here was not a rescue from gravity but an agreement with it. The baby kicked again, and this time he placed his hand where she allowed it, a boundary honored, a promise implied without words. Listener orientation softened into the echo that would carry her forward. Silence was not peace. It was the proof of settled accounts. By morning, she knew there would be no version of freedom that looked like distance. There would be safety purchased daily. There would be power shared unevenly. There would be a city that remembered her shape even when it forgot her name. He gathered the ashes and scattered them into a sealed container. Finality without flourish. The sun climbed indifferent. Somewhere far from their window, a street vendor opened shop. Somewhere closer, a phone buzzed and was ignored. She breathed in, steady, and felt the weight of what remained. He found her cleaning the floors while carrying his child. By morning, she understood the truth. In his world, love doesn't rescue, claims, and never lets go.